Welcome to the Deep Dive.
Great to be here.
Today we're looking into someone who really generates a lot of discussion, Adi Shankaracharya. We've got historical questions, deep philosophy.
Definitely. A figure shrouded in, well, both legend and profound thought.
Exactly. And we have some interesting sources lined up. First, a Reddit discussion, which takes a pretty skeptical look at the usual historical stories.
Right, to traditional narratives.
And then on the flip side, we've got actual excerpts from commentaries attributed to him, on the Upanishads, really digging into the philosophical core.
Yeah, showing the Advaita Vedanta perspective directly from, well, we'll consider the source tradition.
So our mission today is to sort of unpack these, see what the sources actually say about the history versus the ideas, and, pull out the key insights for you.
Sounds like a plan.
Huh?
It often happens that the story around a figure gets tangled up with the actual impact of their thought.
Okay, let's dive in. Let's start with that popular story, the one you hear a lot. The Reddit thread mentions it straight away.
You mean the Digvijaya Yantra?
Yeah, exactly. This idea that Shankaracharya went on this huge tour across India, like an intellectual conquest.
Defeating everyone in debates, especially Buddhists. And that's supposedly how Advaita Vedanta rose to prominence and other schools declined.
That's the narrative. You see it in traditional biographies, even films sometimes.
It's a compelling image, isn't it? The brilliant philosopher single-handedly changing the landscape through debate.
But, the historical take from the Reddit source is different. Quite different.
How so?
It basically says, look, there's almost no solid historical knowledge about an Adi Shankaracharya. The dates people suggest, they span over 1,000 years.
Wow, from the 5th century BCE all the way to the 10th CE, that's a huge range.
It is, and the source argues that him literally traveling everywhere, debating every major contemporary, it's just historically very unlikely.
So it questions the whole premise of that grand tour. And what about the traditional biographies themselves?
Yeah. The source is pretty blunt. Calls them something like unreliable fan fiction.
Fan fiction, okay.
Written centuries later, apparently. The idea is they might not be recording actual events, but maybe reconstructing debates from his writings.
That makes sense. Using the arguments found in his commentaries to create a narrative about him debating opponents.
Yeah, or maybe they were written to explain why someone whose ideas became so huge was, perhaps, criticized or even ignored by some people during his supposed lifetime.
Right, a way to retroactively establish his dominance or explain the opposition.
So these grand debate stories, maybe less history, more narrative tools.
That seems to be the argument. And the source also suggests that the rise of Advaita and the decline of Buddhism in India, it wasn't just about debates, it was much more complex.
What else does it bring up?
Well, things like just the natural ebb and flow of philosophical schools over long periods. Ideas gain and lose influence.
Sure, that happens.
And really significant external stuff, like the fall of kingdoms that supported Buddhism. That's a big practical factor.
Right, patronage drying up.
Exactly. And the destruction of major Buddhist centers, monasteries, universities by invaders. The source mentions Islamic forces, the Huns.
So violent disruption, not just philosophical argument.
And also, it points out that there was already a kind of resurgence of classical Brahmanism happening before Shankaracharya's likely time. He might have been part of that trend, not the sole cause.
And it also says Buddhist practice didn't just vanish.
Apparently not everywhere. The source suggests it continued in some areas much later than the traditional story implies.
Okay, so it's a much messier picture. Political shifts, social changes, intellectual currents. Not just one guy winning arguments.
Pretty much. The Reddit thread even gets specific about the debates mentioned in tradition. It says the biggest one isn't even with a Buddhist.
Oh. Who was it with?
A philosopher named Mandana Mishra from the Purva Mimamsa school, which is interesting, right? And it notes a lack of stories about debates at, say, Nalanda, the huge Buddhist university, which was still a major center then.
That is strange, if the goal was supposedly to defeat Buddhism. And there's more, isn't there? Something about how his writings represent Buddhism.
Yes, this is a key point in the source. It mentions accusations that Shankaracharya's own writings actually misrepresent Buddhist philosophy.
Oh.
By painting it as nihilism, basically. Saying Buddhists believe in nothing when, many Buddhist schools taught a middle way, avoiding extremes of eternal existence and absolute non-existence.
So, arguing against a distorted version of their view, a straw man.
That's the implication. And if his writings are accused of that, it makes you wonder even more about the historical accuracy of face-to-face debate victories.
Yeah, that's a really significant point. It also brings up that whole question the source touches on. Does winning a debate mean you found the truth?
Right. The analogy used is the sophists in ancient Greece,
Hmm?
masters of rhetoric, but not necessarily seeking objective truth.
Debate can be about persuasion, skill,
Hmm.
not just being right.
Exactly. The truth, whatever it is, kind of stands apart from who wins an argument. And the source floats this idea of superiority conceit. Maybe some of these stories were driven by a tradition's desire to see itself as intellectually triumphant.
Hmm. And there were even later historical points raised in that thread, weren't there?
Yeah, things like the claim that Shankaracharya wasn't widely known as a major figure until around the 12th century.
That late?
According to this perspective, yes. And the idea of Brahmins hijacking or taking over Buddhist sites happened even later, like post-13th or 14th century.
Okay. And one specific biography, the Shankaracharya.
Right. It mentions a figure, Goraknath, who lived much later, which, if true, would potentially date that biography and its version of the story to maybe the 12th to 14th centuries AD, much later than the traditional timeline.
So pulling this historical part together, the picture from this source is, well, it's murky, much less clear-cut than the popular legend.
Definitely. It suggests a tradition solidifying its place over a long time, through many factors, including, importantly, the power of its ideas in texts, rather than just through historically verified debate wins by one person.
Okay. That gives us a really important counter-narrative on the historical side. But like you said at the start, whatever the history of the man, the philosophy associated with Shankaracharya and Advaita Vedanta is undeniably huge.
Absolutely. And that's where these commentary excerpts come in. They give us a direct look at the ideas.
Right, let's switch gears then. These commentaries attributed to Sankara, their interpretations of ancient texts, the Upanishads.
Yes, he's revered as a master commentator, unlocking the meaning of these foundational scriptures for the Advaita tradition.
Okay, starting with the Isa Upanishad commentary. There's a really strong point made right away about the Atman, the true self,
What's the core idea there?
that it's not something you, like, create or change or get by doing rituals, what he calls karma.
Ah, so it's not a result of action.
No, and it's not a doer or enjoyer in the way we usually think of those things related to actions and consequences. The commentary says the main scriptures, like the Upanishads and the Gita, are really just trying to describe this true nature of the self.
So they're descriptive, not prescriptive in terms of how to manufacture the self.
Exactly. It's not something you attain through doing stuff. It's presented as what you fundamentally are.
Which, as you said, makes that injunction, do not covet, suddenly click into place.
Right. The commentary explains it. Why covet? The Atman is everything. So the idea is to renounce the unreal, the separate things by seeing it all as belonging to or just being the Atman.
It's a radical shift from desire for specifics to recognition of, well, universal oneness.
And this connects to what he calls the two paths, right? Based on other scriptures.
Yes, he lays out two roads. One is karma, actions, rituals aimed at results in this world or maybe heavenly worlds after death.
The path of action.
And the other is sannyasa, renunciation, specifically renouncing desires and the actions that stem from them.
And the commentary seems pretty clear which path it favors for the ultimate goal.
It does. Sannyasa, renunciation, is presented as the path for emancipation, for liberation, which, as you say, feels very countercultural in a world focused on doing and achieving.
Totally. It kind of flips the usual values. He talks about the danger of ignorance, avidya,
Yeah.
often linked to just doing rituals without understanding.
Right, getting stuck in mechanical action.
But he also warns against getting stuck in vidya alone, if that means just knowledge about deities or rituals, not the ultimate knowledge.
Yeah, pursuing either ignorance, rituals only, or partial knowledge, deity knowledge only, leads to darkness, to suffering. He even says the latter leads to greater darkness, interestingly.
But hang on, didn't the text mention combining vidya and avidya, like doing rituals with some kind of knowledge?
It does discuss that. But the commentary is really careful here. It says combining ritual action, like the Agnihotra fire sacrifice, with knowledge of deities gets you certain results, like becoming one with those deities, reaching higher realms, a kind of relative immortality within the cosmic cycle.
Ah, so still within the system, not beyond it.
Precisely. He draws a sharp line between that kind of result and the result of knowing the true Atman. That knowledge leads to absolute emancipation, freedom from the whole cycle.
Got it. So action and partial knowledge work for relative goals, but for ultimate freedom.
For ultimate freedom, the commentary insists you need to renounce karma and its supports. The logic is profound. If you realize the Atman, you realize you are not the individual doer. So how can action, which depends on the idea of a doer, be compatible with that ultimate knowledge?
They seem fundamentally opposed.
Like light and darkness, as later analogies will suggest, one binds, the other liberates.
Okay, that's a massive philosophical point. Now, moving to the Kina Upanishad commentary, it kicks off with this amazing question.
But one about who directs everything.
Yeah. By whom is the mind sent forth? Who directs the life force, the speech, the eye, the ear? What's the ultimate agent?
It's digging for the root of consciousness, the source of all our faculties. And the answer given points to the Atman, or Brahman, this unseen underlying reality.
But then it says Brahman is other than the known and other than the unknown. How do you even wrap your head around that?
That's the crux of the challenge. It's not an object you can know like other objects, through senses or intellect. And it's not completely unknowable either.
So how is it known, according to the commentary?
Not just through logic chopping or debate, it says. It comes through tradition, Shruti, scripture, passed down by a qualified teacher, but also through your own reasoning applied to that teaching, and ultimately through direct inner experience or realization.
Which leads to that fantastic paradoxical statement from the student in the text.
I do not think I know it well, nor do I know that I do not know it. He amongst us who knows it, and he too does not know that he does not know.
It perfectly captures that sense of knowing something that transcends ordinary conceptual knowing. You can't pin it down like an object, but it's not totally alien either.
It points towards an intuitive grasp, an experiential certainty that's different from subject-object knowledge. The commentary describes Brahman as the ultimate enabler, the speech of speech, eye of the eye, mind of the mind.
The power behind the powers.
Exactly. The underlying intelligence or reality that makes function possible.
There's also a technical discussion in there about Pratibodhaviditam. What's Sankara's main point in that interpretation?
He argues strongly that the Atman isn't just some inert substance that acquires consciousness. Rather, the Atman is intelligence, is consciousness itself. It's the eternal witness of all mental states.
Consciousness is its very nature, not a quality it gains.
That's the core idea he's defending.
Now, this is what I found it really illuminating, that story in the Kina Upanishad about the gods, the devas. Fire, wind, Indra. After winning a battle, Brahman appears mysteriously.
Right, and they can't figure out who this powerful being is.
And they can't even affect a simple straw that Brahman places before them. Fire can't burn it. Wind can't blow it away. What's the commentary say about that?
Sankara reads it as a powerful allegory. It shows how even mighty beings, caught up in the ego of being the doer, we won the victory, can be completely ignorant of the ultimate source of power, Brahman.
Their power is derived, limited.
Exactly. Their failure with the straw proves it. And Indra's approach, not boasting, but seeking knowledge from the mysterious being, who turns out to be Brahman manifesting, shows the correct path. Humility, inquiry, and moving beyond the false notion of individual agency to recognize the ultimate reality.
It keeps circling back to that idea. The Atman isn't the limited individual doer. Okay, let's jump to the Mundaka Upanishad commentary. Here, he explicitly defines two kinds of knowledge.
Yes, aparavidya and paravidya, lower and higher knowledge.
And aparavidya, the lower one, is basically the Vedas related to rituals.
Primarily, yes. Knowledge dealing with karma, actions, rituals, and their results, which crucially keep you bound within samsara.
Samsara, the cycle of birth, death, suffering. And he paints a pretty bleak picture of samsara in this commentary.
He really does. He calls it misery, describes it as beginningless and endless, a constant flow like a river. The results gained through rituals, the different worlds you might reach. He dismisses them as temporary, fragile.
Like illusions, mirages, dreams, bubbles.
Exactly. All products of ignorance, desire, and action. The whole thing is presented as something to be thoroughly rejected if you're seeking the higher knowledge, paravidya.
Okay, so a paravidya operates within that cycle. Paravidya is the way out. What is paravidya knowledge of? What's the nature of Brahman described here?
It's described often by what it's not. Can't be perceived by senses, can't be grasped, has no origin, no caste, no eyes or ears, no hands or feet in the usual sense.
So beyond all categories.
But positively, it's eternal, all-pervading, incredibly subtle, undecaying, the ultimate source of all beings. And it's all-knowing, Sarvajna and Sarvavid.
Knowing everything generally and specifically, and creation stems from this Brahman.
Yes, the commentary says from this unmanifest Brahman comes the manifest reality. Hiranyagarbha, names, forms, food, everything unfolds in sequence. But the absolute key is that all of this is Brahman. The universe has no independent existence apart from it.
Seeing it as separate is the fundamental error.
That's the core ignorance, like mistaking a rope for a snake in the dark.
The famous rope snake analogy. So, how does one actually acquire this paravidya? It sounds challenging.
It is. The commentary stresses you first need to develop a profound sense of disillusionment with samsara, with the impermanent nature of worldly results, a real disgust almost.
You have to really want out.
Yes. And then, crucially, you must approach a qualified guru, a teacher, someone who isn't just learned in scriptures, Kshatriya, but is also established in Brahmanista.
Someone who lives the truth.
Exactly, possessing qualities like self-control, tranquility, compassion. And you have to approach with humility, ready to serve and learn. The text is clear. You can't just figure this out on your own from books.
The teacher is indispensable. Are there other things that help? Other aids?
Definitely. The commentary lists several crucial aids that need intense effort. Truthfulness in thought, word, and deed is highlighted as vital. Strength, spiritual stamina, calmness, freedom from agitation caused by worldly desires.
And renunciation again.
Absolutely central. Sannyasa. Knowledge combined with renunciation is the path. Knowledge without it isn't sufficient for liberation, according to this text. And, of course, pursuing knowledge itself diligently.
Okay, now let's talk about that beautiful analogy from the mundaka, the two birds on the tree. How does the commentary unpack that?
It's incredibly evocative. The tree is the body. There are two birds. One bird, representing the individual soul, jiva, is frantically eating the fruits of the tree, experiencing the results of its actions, sweet and bitter. And because it identifies with this eating, this doing and enjoying, it grieves, it suffers, caught in delusion.
That's us most of the time.
That's the image, yes.
Yeah.
But the other bird, representing the Lord, the Atman, the ultimate self, just sits there serenely watching. It doesn't eat the fruits. It's uninvolved, unaffected.
The witness.
The pure witness. And the commentary says the moment the first bird, the jiva, stops frantically eating and looks up, sees the glory of the second bird and realizes, I am that bird. My true nature is that witnessing self, which is the same in all beings.
What happens?
It's freed from sorrow. The delusion breaks. It shows starkly the opposition between karma, eating the fruit, and jnana, seeing the other bird, realizing the self.
Yeah.
They're like darkness and light. And that turning away from the fruit towards the witness, that's renunciation in action.
A powerful image. So what's the ultimate outcome of gaining this knowledge of the Paramatman, the Supreme Self?
The commentary describes it as a complete unraveling of bondage. The knot of the heart, which symbolizes ignorance, desires, latent tendencies, is cut. All doubts vanish. All accumulated karma is burnt up, rendered ineffective. Total freedom. One becomes immortal, not in the sense of living forever in a body, but liberated from the cycle of birth and death. No longer subject to taking other paths after death. Brahman is realized as the pure light within, the light that illuminates everything else. Sun, moon, stars, fire, only shine by its light.
Wow. And finally, there's a warning at the end, isn't there, about who should be taught this?
Yes, a strong caution. This highest knowledge, Paravidya, shouldn't just be scattered randomly. It should only be taught to disciples who are properly prepared, those who perform their duties, are learned, centered in Brahman, have faith, and have undertaken specific vows related to discipline and purity.
It emphasizes the seriousness and the need for qualification.
Exactly. It's not casual information. It's transformative knowledge that requires readiness.
Okay. So let's try and pull these threads together for everyone listening. We've got this skeptical historical perspective from the Reddit source questioning the traditional debate stories.
Right. Suggesting a more complex, gradual historical process and maybe some narrative construction in the traditional accounts.
And then we have these incredibly rich philosophical insights from the commentaries, diving deep into the nature of reality, the self, the path of knowledge versus action, the necessity of renunciation, the role of the guru.
Laying out the core tenets of Advaita Vedanta, the non-dual reality of Brahmanatman, and the path to realizing that identity for liberation.
So what's the big takeaway here? How do these two seemingly contrasting perspectives fit together?
Well, I think it highlights something crucial. Whether or not the specific historical narratives about Shankaracharya's debates are literally true, the philosophical system attributed to him or the tradition he represents clearly had immense power and influence.
The ideas themselves resonated deeply.
Exactly. They offered a compelling framework for understanding existence, consciousness, suffering, and a path to ultimate freedom. The commentary showed the depth and sophistication of that framework.
So for you listening, it's a fascinating look at how history and philosophy interact. Historical accounts can be debated, revised, seen as complex narratives.
While the philosophical questions of what is real? Who am I? How can I be free? And the answers offered continue to engage people across centuries.
It shows how we grapple with both the stories about thinkers and the actual content of their thought. The journey from lower knowledge tied to action and results to higher knowledge aimed at liberation through realizing the self. That's a profound narrative in itself, presented within the philosophy.
Yes, and the emphasis on aids like truth, calmness, renunciation, it connects deep metaphysics with ethical and practical discipline.
So maybe the real victory wasn't necessarily in specific debates, but in the enduring power of these ideas to offer a path.
That's certainly one way to look at it. The influence speaks for itself, regardless of historical certainty about the specific events.
Okay, so here's something to leave you with, something to ponder. Given this historical uncertainty surrounding the person, Adi Shankaracharya, and the undeniable lasting impact of the Advaita philosophy associated with that tradition, how does separating the story about the teaching from the teaching itself change how we think about influential figures and the way their ideas shape human thought over time?
Hmm. That's a great question to mull over. How much does the story matter versus the substance?